Israel must remain vigilant on the border with Egypt as tensions between the countries heat up. Following the release of only 3 hostages despite President Trump's ultimatum to release all living hostages, Netanyahu convened an emergency cabinet meeting Saturday evening to debate the question, is it time to open the gates of hell on Gaza? Meanwhile, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi revealed Hamas's massive bluff during the release of hostages Yair, Sagi Dekel-Chen, and Sasha Trupnov in the Gaza Strip. Hamas staged a series of disgraceful tricks meant to strengthen the organization's propaganda and psychological terror against Israeli citizens, but they didn't fool anyone. We will break down Hamas's pure evil, its disgusting ploy against Einav Zangoker, the mother of one of the hostages, and against the hostages themselves. We will also analyze every moment, the emotional images, the sense of loss, and the lingering questions about whether Phase A of the deal will be completed. But even before that question has been answered, the mediators are already increasing the pressure to begin negotiations for Phase B of this ceasefire. According to the agreement between Hamas and Israel, talks on the next phase were supposed to conclude by the end of next week, but they have not yet begun. However, Israel has once again made a significant effort to try and make life easier for civilians in Gaza by bringing in caravans or small mobile living spaces to place in Gaza in coordination with the Americans. This comes as Arab governments continue to make demands and statements about President Trump's plan for Gaza, but are taking few concrete actions. And, meanwhile, celebrations erupt in the Palestinian cities of Khan Yunis and Ramallah as terrorists who were freed from Israeli prisons arrived and promptly burned the shirts that they were released in because they were decorated with the Star of David. In exchange for the release of Sagi Dekel-Chen, Sasha Trupnov, and Yair, Israel freed 369 terrorists, 36 of whom were serving life sentences. Now switching our focus to the northern arena, there was also some drama in Lebanon as an Iranian plane carrying weapons and ammunition meant for Hezbollah was forced by Israel to turn back instead of landing at Beirut's international airport. Also over the weekend, another senior Hezbollah operative was eliminated by an Israeli airstrike along with some of his henchmen. Drones were also fired into Israeli territory from Lebanon over the weekend in a severe test of the ceasefire agreement. And meanwhile, Israeli forces were busy over the weekend with efforts to tamp down celebrations over the release of terrorists into northern Samaria amidst ongoing security operations there. Finally, there was an unusual American airstrike in Idlib, northwestern Syria over the weekend, likely targeting a senior Al-Qaeda or ISIS regional leader. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report on what is happening in Israel on day 499 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in the region which are controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps of Iran, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. Before we begin, I want to invite you to press the subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you stay tuned to the truth and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. I also want to tell you about Vinya, a wholesome product of the Holy Land that can help you improve circulation and make a positive effect on every aspect of your health and physical well-being. I use this product myself, and I'll tell you more about it later in the report. But first, let's get into the news. Throughout the past week, Israel managed the hostage release crisis on two parallel tracks. On one hand, it offered public support for United States President Donald Trump's demand for the immediate release of all the hostages, thereby risking the entire deal. On the other hand, it tried to pave the way for continuing to release the 9 remaining living hostages who are supposed to be freed under Phase A. On Saturday, a step was taken down the second path as 3 hostages were released in accordance with the original plan. After 498 days in captivity, the returning hostages exhibited resilience even in front of the terrorists. Hamas and the Islamic Jihad planned to exploit Saturday morning's transfer of the hostages to the Red Cross for grotesque propaganda. But the relatives in Israel had no doubt upon seeing footage broadcast from the Strip that Sagid Dekelchen, Yair Horon and Sasha Tubnov stood pale but upright, spoiling Hamas's plans. Due to concerns for their condition after such a long time in captivity, there was relief at seeing that they appeared to be in decent physical condition. They did appear very pale, likely because they haven't been exposed to sunlight for a prolonged period, and Dekelchen and Horen were also seen limping. Nevertheless, the feeling was that even on stage, they demonstrated nobility in the presence of the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad terrorists surrounding them. I personally want to send lots of love to Sasha, whose partner, Sapir Cohen, never stopped believing and making sure he'd come back. She too was freed from captivity and was interviewed in our channel hosted by Mati Shoshani. I recommend you watch that episode here on TBN Israel, as it offers a first-hand account of what the hostages in Hamas captivity go through. Sasha Tupnov, who was freed from captivity on Saturday evening, along with Sagid Dekelchen and Yair Horen, had been held along by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group. He suspected that his father, Vitali, was murdered in the October 7th massacre, and upon his release, the IDF forces confirmed these suspicions. When he heard these news, Sasha burst into tears. In contrast, on Israel's Kan News, it was mentioned that Sagid Dekelchen and Yair Horen were in captivity together in recent days along with other hostages. Yair's mother said that he had been in tunnels and so had the other two hostages who were freed. In recent times, they also stayed in apartments and were even taken outside, as can be seen from the cynical footage of Sasha Tupnov at the Gaza seashore. This film was made for propaganda purposes, so that Hamas could say that it was treating the hostages well, but again, no one should be fooled by this. And speaking of propaganda meant to convey a false narrative, in some of the film and images from Khan Yunis on Saturday, we can see that Hamas and the Islamic Jihad terrorists are armed with IDF weaponry and wearing IDF uniforms, as well as additional Israeli military equipment such as vests, camouflage hats, etc. A Hamas source told Al Jazeera that all this gear was taken from IDF soldiers that were killed or kidnapped on October 7th, and in addition, the 3 hostages were brought to the release facility in Khan Yunis in an Israeli vehicle that Hamas looted from the border area during the massacre. In another trick by the terrorist organization, Hamas placed an hourglass on the release stage next to a photo of Einav Sangoker and her son Matan with the caption, "Time is running out." In published photos, Yair is seen holding the cruel hourglass intended for Einav. And another report says that Sagid Dekelchen received from Hamas a gift in the form of a gold medal to mark the birth of his daughter about a year ago while he was still in captivity. Meanwhile, the Hamas spokesperson stated today that the organization awaits the implementation of the humanitarian protocol by Israel based on mediator assurances. According to him, renewing the process of exchanging hostages and prisoners is done pursuant to Hamas's commitment to the mediators and after receiving assurances binding Israel to the agreement. He added that Israel will be required to release the rest of the prisoners implementing the ceasefire terms, and noted that talks continue towards the second stage of negotiations. Amidst all of this, IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi spoke out on Saturday, directly addressing a unit of Shayetet 13 commandos, but indirectly speaking to the entire IDF. He said, "Don't get too worked out about videos of Hamas operatives in pressed uniforms at the hostage release ceremony in Gaza. These are the operatives who, until the ceasefire, were afraid to confront you, hid their uniforms, sat in some tent in Mawasi in civilian clothes. After the ceasefire started, they ironed the uniform, came out and stood there with puffed up chests on stage. And when we come back, they'll remember who we are and who they are, and that's how to look at it. We have breathing room, we have strength, we have a backbone, and a lot of determination. And this thing is built from the ground up and top down. And if our instructions, our orders, and your deeds come together along that chain of command, nobody can break it. Along with this, it should be noted that even though yesterday's phase proceeded as planned and Israel backed down from demanding the release of all the hostages at once, the Israeli messaging sheet doesn't yet indicate business as usual. A senior political figure said 2 days ago that at the political echelon, they are working in full coordination with the United States to rescue as many living hostages as possible as soon as possible. And that afterwards, all options remain open. At the same time, the Prime Minister's office announced this evening that Netanyahu intends to convene a political security cabinet soon to decide on Israel's next steps, adding that the release of the 3 hostages yesterday was thanks to the combination of reinforcing IDF forces around the Gaza area and President Trump's firm stance. On that subject, only 3 hostages were released on Saturday from this brutal captivity, despite the American threat that Israel could open the gates of hell if all the remaining hostages are not released immediately. It remains unclear whether Israel will seize this opportunity to return to fighting and decisively defeat Hamas with the backing of the United States President Donald Trump. One moment before we delve deeper into how Israel's diplomatic apparatus will shape the state of the war on the ground and the continued release of the hostages, I want to ask you to keep spreading the truth about what is happening in Israel. Share our videos on YouTube and follow us on social media. And most importantly, don't forget to click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank again the brave soldiers and security forces who continue fighting to keep Israel safe and work tirelessly to bring our hostages home. This past year, during my reserve service, I witnessed firsthand the sacrifices that these recruits make, some of them even in their 30s and 40s, serving more than 200 days a year. It's an incredible commitment, but it's also a heavy burden, both emotionally and physically. For me, faith was my anchor. Praying every day gave me the strength to push forward. But I also found a practical boost in Vinya, an incredible Israeli innovation made from red grape cells. Vinya enhances blood flow to your heart, brain, and muscles, helping you feel more energetic, focused, and ready to take on the day. It's a natural way to support your body without the sugar or alcohol found in grapes. What's more, Vinya isn't just capsules. You can enjoy it as coffee or tea each morning, giving you a fresh, healthy start of your day. I used it daily during my service, and I still do today. So if you want to feel the difference for yourself, visit www.vinyatbnisrael.com or call 800-638-1944. Trust me, you won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the news. The mediating countries are stepping up pressure on Israel and Hamas to begin negotiations for the second stage of the deal to free hostages, and so Israel must start seriously conducting negotiations for the next step. According to the agreement, the talks were supposed to conclude by the end of next week, but they have not yet begun. Against the background of preparations for the next stage, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived in Israel on Saturday evening. Following senior-level meetings over the weekend, Israeli officials announced that they would like to move up the next phases of freeing the hostages, and the mediators are reportedly working on this. But it will require compensation from Israel. And meanwhile, an Israeli official explained that President Trump wants to alter the agreement so that it bears his name and his imprint. This includes both the efforts to move up the timing of the next phases and the attempt to change Phase B so that it does not involve phases but releases all the hostages together. To understand more deeply where the situation is heading diplomatically, our senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, will take us through the details.
Thank you, Yair. Yes, Israel finds itself in a very, very odd and tricky place at the same time. So let's break this down. For the first time in a really long time, we are being pushed to keep up with other countries, namely the US, who are calling us to use a heavier hand against Hamas and their terrorists. So you might ask yourself, what are we even talking about here? So in the last couple of weeks, and specifically this last week, President Trump has been pushing the Israeli administration publicly, calling us out to use the heaviest hand possible, claiming publicly that zero tolerance will be given for Palestinian hesitation to fully return all the hostages on the Hamas side in the Gaza Strip. Israel, at the same time, is committed to a ceasefire agreement where there's a staggered process in which the hostages will be released. On the one hand, we're happy for the invitation to have a heavy hand on the Palestinian agenda with the Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. But on the other hand, we want to live up to the agreement. We don't want to blow up the agreement, not literally speaking, of course, figuratively speaking. We want to carry it out as planned. We want to take our time in the negotiation. Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel wasn't fully ready for what was coming down the pipeline. And it's good for us on the one hand, and on the second hand, it's something that we need to cautiously tread through because we don't want to disrupt the situation that currently exists. Let me remind all of you that in Israel, the topic of hostage release is one of crucial importance. People are very touchy about this. The entire nation every weekend sits at their TVs or their smartphones or their computers waiting to see the hostages come out of captivity. So any thought of anything that would disrupt that very delicate balance that was reached with Hamas, by the way, of course, with the help of the outgoing Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration, anything that would jeopardize the stability of that relationship. Now remember, we have a couple more weeks coming down the line of additional hostages being released. Anything that would disrupt that is very upsetting to the Israeli people. So what's interesting here is that the Trump administration is actually de facto calling on Israel to violate the terms of the ceasefire agreement. We continue playing the delicate dance of power and relationships that we always have to in the Middle East. Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet are going to have to be very cautious about how they tread light enough to not disrupt the agreement with Hamas, and light enough and respectfully enough to continue the good trend of relationships with the Trump new administration. That's where exactly we are right now. We're looking at a new Middle East when it comes to relationships. We look at a US administration that is more willing than ever before, in my lifetime at least, as far as I can remember, to take action in a decisive way, to reshape the balance of power in the Middle East, to act swiftly and on behalf of the State of Israel. Something I find very interesting about this whole chain of events is that President Trump and the US administration have publicly made a stand aside the people of Israel. And it's not just like a generic, like we stand with Israel, we care about the people of Israel, they have a right to defend themselves. It's been a public statement of whatever it is you need, whatever is needed for your people, whatever action or support is needed to keep this country safe, to allow you to defend yourself, whatever that is, you have our unequivocal support to do that. So we're in the best of times when it comes to a relationship with the Trump administration. Absolutely the best of times. And at the same time, it's a very tricky situation. And I would just say, as always, it is a tricky time to be in the Middle East. So there is a next phase to the negotiation. We're sort of at the tail end of phase number one of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas, one out of three planned phases. The third one is sort of like the long-term agreement. So one of the big pieces that remains to be debated and discussed over the next phase of the negotiation between Israel and Hamas is how much humanitarian aid goes in and how fast new structures and homes go into the Gaza Strip. And that's something Hamas wants to happen rapidly. They want to show a picture of victory where they're in control of the Gaza Strip, where they hold possession of the main assets, where they're the ones bringing in the good and the aid and the benefit to those people. And Israel is using exactly the other end of that rope, wanting to make sure that we have control over what's happening, the timing of it, and how exactly it's done. Bear in mind there's a whole long process here that requires Israel and Hamas to reach a midterm and then a long-term agreement. And for that to happen, we have to be able to sit at the same table. So once again, the US is again the unknown in this entire relationship. President Trump and his administration are moving at a rapid pace. They're aggressive, they're fast-paced, they're calling on Israel to take action against Hamas and to restabilize our position in this area. And our government has to tread lightly between American interest and the desire not to disappoint the Trump administration, and between the desire to maintain the delicate balance of powers that is always required here in the Middle East. And now back to you, Yair Pinto at the studio. I'm Mati Shoshani, coming to you from Reserves once more.
Thank you, Mati Shoshani, for getting into the details. Back in Israel, as in every phase of the deal, on Saturday, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners were also released from Israeli prisons in exchange for freeing Sasha Turpnov, Sagit Dekel-Chen, and Yair Horen. There was a change in the routine this time, however, as the Israeli Prison Services has special clothes made for the released prisoners to wear. The new outfits included t-shirts imprinted with a Star of David and the emblem of the Israeli Prison Service, as well as the caption which said in Arabic, "We will not forget and we will not forgive." In some previous phases, the terrorists wore bracelets with an Israeli prison inscription, and in addition, they were shown a video about the destruction in the Gaza Strip. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development, and we invite you to participate by helping us spread the truth. You can share our videos on YouTube and follow us on social media, and visit our website, tbnisrael.com, for updates between the videos. And speaking of videos, don't forget to click on that subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you'll never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now switching our focus to the northern arena, an Iranian plane set to land in Beirut's international airport in Lebanon on Thursday instead turned around and flew all the way home after authorities in Lebanon refused to give it clearance to land. The refusal was the result of a warning by the IDF that the aircraft was likely carrying weapons and ammunition meant to be delivered to the Hezbollah terrorist organization, and it must not be allowed to deliver its cargo. There were violent protests outside the Beirut airport following the move, with Hezbollah supporters burning tires and blocking the road leading to the airport. The Hezbollah supporters even attacked United Nations vehicles trying to use the road and seriously injuring at least 2 peacekeepers. In related news, a new route was recently exposed for transferring suitcases containing billions of dollars from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. The cash was arriving at Rafik Hariri International Airport on board Iranian planes, and according to the IDF Arabic spokesperson's unit, Colonel Avichai Aderi, the warnings he gave that the airport could become a legitimate military target for the IDF if this continues was taken seriously. Also, over the weekend, reports in Arab media portals indicated that an Israeli UAV had carried out a strike on a vehicle in the village of Jarjuh in southern Lebanon. The terrorist who was eliminated was directly involved in repeated violations of the agreement between Israel and Lebanon, including spearheading UAV launch operations into Israeli territory. Defense Minister Israel Katz responded to the strike saying that, "As I warned, if there are UAVs, there will be no Hezbollah. We will not allow a reality of UAV launches towards the State of Israel." On this note, it is important to remember that in recent weeks, Israeli military intelligence and the Air Force Intelligence Directorate have been monitoring attempts to rebuild Hezbollah's air unit, which was dealt a severe blow this war. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in the Lebanese arena, and especially as the first phase of the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon concludes. Now, we switch our focus to the southern arena, where Israel finds itself confronting a problem that is so old it's new again. Egypt, which has not fought a war with Israel since 1973 and has had a peace agreement with us since 1979, is building up a large force in the Sinai Peninsula in a direct violation of the peace agreement. Security relations between the two countries remain tense, but basically stable, even though in recent years Egypt has sent large forces into the Sinai Peninsula to combat terrorist groups based there, as well as purchasing some very powerful strategic weapon systems which have no relevance to anti-terrorism operations. And speaking more generally, Egypt is not facing major external threats, yet it continues to greatly expand its military power. In recent years, it has acquired helicopters, fighter jets, and advanced air defense systems. Additionally, despite its commitment to the peace agreement with Israel, there is ingrained anti-Semitism in Egyptian media and the education system, portraying Israel as an enemy. Additionally, Islamic propaganda from the Muslim Brotherhood and extremist elements strengthen anti-Israel attitudes among the Egyptian public. And despite that, with Israel's consent, Egypt increased its military presence in Sinai over the recent years to fight terrorism and criminal smuggling gangs. But the fear is that these forces will remain even after the threat is eliminated. And moreover, the Egyptian media recently reported that messages were passed to Israel warning that any Israeli hold on the Philadelphia corridor could violate the Camp David Accord, which are the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. Israel warns that despite the official peace, the IDF must prepare for any scenario, including a potential future confrontation. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on any developments in this matter, and as always, we ask you to help us by spreading our videos, sharing them, and subscribing to this YouTube channel. Now, going back to the northern arena, reports are emerging of an airstrike on a vehicle in the Idlib region of Syria, which was carried out by an American Mk-9 Reaper drone. These reports have not been confirmed, and there is no statement from the United States Central Command, CENTCOM, as of now. However, it was likely of a coalition strike led by the United States against extremist jihadist elements, and according to unconfirmed reports, the strike eliminated a senior figure in Al-Qaeda or a regional leader of ISIS. We will continue to report on any developments in this matter as well, so please keep spreading the truth, share and follow us, and most importantly, pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for our hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip by the terrible Hamas terrorist organization for almost 500 days. Pray for our forces that are fighting to defend us in the sea, in the land, and in the sky. And the most important thing that you can do is keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. And together we will win this war because God is on our side.